welcome back to the channel. Let me adjust the camera here a little bit. All right, that's better. Today I'm going to be reading out of the book of Judith in the Complete Apocrypha. This book has 16 chapters in it, so I'm going to try to read chapters 1 through 8 today. Look, I graduated to a neoprene wrist brace, and now I'm supposed to be working on flexibility because my range of motion is pretty bad. Yeah, see me waving? It's almost like one of those pretty waves. So anyway, I'll go ahead and read the introduction to the book. Oh, that's where I'm supposed to stop. I put my bookmark there. And I do have my New King James Version Bible because I was reading the introduction just because I was curious of what it said before I actually get into Judith. And FYI, I've never read Judith either. So if this is a first time for you, it's a first time for me as well. Yay, we'll be first timers together. So that's exciting. Anyway, the book of Judith relates to the story of God's deliverance of the Jewish people. This is accomplished by the hand of a female, a constant motive, and then they give references throughout the book of Judith. 8:33, 9:9, 10, 12:4, 13:4, 14, 15, 15:10, 16:5. Meant to recall the hand of God in the Exodus narrative, Exodus 15:6. So I went ahead and bookmarked Exodus 15, and I wasn't sure the verse, but it's 6, obviously, so I'm going to read that. Your right hand, O Lord, has become glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, has dashed in the enemy in pieces. So, yeah, that's what the New King James Version says. I'm not sure what other versions say. This is one of the literal translations of the Bible. It's not the most literal. They say the NASB is the most literal translation there is, and I actually have in my Amazon wish list a parallel Bible of the NASB along with the NIV version in there, so I can compare, because NIV is more of a moderate. It's not far end of literal, and it's not far end of the other spectrum either. It's like right there in the middle. The work may have been written around 100 BC. There are 4 Greek recensions of Judith: Septuagint Codices, Vaticanus, Sinacinus, Alexandrinus, and Basiliano Vaticanus. 4 ancient translations: Old Latin, Syriac, Sahidic, and Ethiopic, and some late Hebrew versions, apparently translated from the Vulgate. Despite Jerome's claim to have translated an Aramaic text, no ancient Aramaic or Hebrew manuscripts have been found. The oldest extant text of Judith is the preservation of 15:1-7, inscribed on a 3rd century AD potsherd, or potsherd, I'm not sure, Potsherd. Whatever the reasons, the rabbis did not count Judith among their scriptures, and the Reformation adopted that position. Chapter 1. In the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned over the Assyrians in Nineveh, the great city, in the days of Arphaxad, who reigned over Medes in Ecbatana, and built around Ecbatana walls of hewn stones 3 cubits broad and 6 cubits long, and made the height of the wall 70 cubits, and its breadth 50 cubits, and set its towers at its gates 100 cubits high, and its breadth in the foundation was 60 cubits, and made its gates, even gates that were raised to the height of 70 cubits, and their breadth 40 cubits, for his mighty army to go out of, and the setting of the array of its footmen. Even in those days, King Nebuchadnezzar made war with King Arphaxad in the great plain. This plain is on the borders of Ragau. There came to meet him all that lived in the hill country, and all that lived by Euphrates, Tigris, and Hydaspes, and the plain of Arioch, the king of the Elamaeans. Many nations of the sons of Chilod assembled themselves to the battle. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, sent all who lived in Persia and all who lived westward, to those who lived in Cilicia, Damascus, Libanus, and Antilobanus, and to all who lived along the seacoast, and to those among the nations that were of Carmel and Gilead, and to the higher Galilee in the great plain of Esdraelon, and to all who were in Samaria and its cities, and beyond Jordan to Jerusalem, Bethany, Chelis, Kadesh, and the river of Egypt, to Tahpanhes, Ramses, and all of the land of Goshen, until you come above the Tanis and Memphis, and to all who lived in Egypt, until you come to the borders of Ethiopia. And all those who lived in all the land made light of the commandment of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, and didn't go with him to the war, for they were not afraid of him. Excuse me. But he was before them as one man. They turned away his messengers from their presence without effect and with disgrace. And Nebuchadnezzar was exceedingly angry with all this land, and he swore by his throne and kingdom that he would surely be avenged upon all the coasts of Sicilia, Damascus, and Syria, that he would kill with his sword all the inhabitants of the land of Moab, and the children of Ammon, all Judea, and all that were in Egypt, until you come to the borders of the two seas. And he set the battle in array with his army against King Arphaxad in the 17th year, and he prevailed in his battle, and turned to flight all the army of Arphaxad, with all his horses and all of his chariots. He became master of his cities, and he came even to Ecbatana, and took the towers, plundered its streets, and turned its beauty into shame. He took Arphaxad in the mountains of Ragal, struck him through with his darts, and utterly destroyed him to this day. He returned with them to Nineveh, he and all of his company of sundry nations, an exceedingly great multitude of men of war. And there he took his ease and banqueted, he and his armies, for 120 days. Chapter 2. In the 18th year, the 22nd day of the first month, there was talk in the house of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, that he should be avenged on all the land, even as he spoke. He called together all the servants and all his great men, and communicated with them his secret counsel, and concluded that afflicting out of all the land out of his own mouth, they decreed to destroy all flesh which didn't follow the word of his mouth. It came to pass, when he had ended his counsel, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, called Holofernes, the chief captain of his army, which was next after him. All said to him, "The great king, the Lord of all the earth, says, Behold, you will go out from my presence, and take with you men who trust in their strength, 120,000 footmen and 12,000 horses with their riders. And you will go out against all the west country, because they disobeyed the commandment of my mouth. You will declare to them that they should prepare earth and water, because I will go out in my wrath against them, and will cover the whole face of the earth with the fleet of my army, and I will give them plunder to them. Their slain will fill their valleys and brooks, and the river will be filled with their dead until it overflows. I will lead them captives to the utmost parts of all the earth. But you will go out and take all of their coast for me first. If they will yield themselves to you, then you must reserve them for me until the day of their reproof. As for those who are disobedient, your eye will not spare, but you will give them up to be slain and to be plundered in all your land. For as I live, and by the power of my kingdom, I have spoken, and I will do this with my hand. Moreover, you will not transgress anything of the commandments of your Lord, but you, my ear itches, but you will surely accomplish them as I have commanded you. You will not defer to do them. So Holofernes went out from the presence of his Lord, and called all the governors and captains and officers out of the army of Ashur. He counted chosen men for the battle, and his Lord has commanded him 120,000 with 12,000 archers on horseback. He arranged them as a great multitude, and is ordered for the war. He took camels and asses and mules for their baggage, an exceedingly great multitude, and sheep and oxen and goats without number for their provision, and great store of many rations for every man, and exceedingly much gold and silver out of the king's house. He went out, and he and all his army, on their journey to go before the king Nebuchadnezzar, and to cover all the face of each earth westward with their chariots, horsemen, and chosen footmen. The great company of various nations went out with them like locusts, and like the sand of the earth, for they could not be counted by any reason of their multitude. And they departed out of Nineveh 3 days' journey toward the plain of Bechteleth, and encamped from their Bechteleth near the mountain which is at the left hand of the upper Cilicia. And he took all of his army, his footmen, horsemen, and chariots, and went away from there into the hill country, and destroyed Put and Lud, and plundered all the children of Rasses and the children of Ishmael, which were along the wilderness to the south of the land of Chileans. And he went through the Euphrates, and went through Mesopotamia, and broke down all the high cities that were upon the river Arbani, until you come to the sea. And he took possession of the borders of Sicilia, and killed all that resisted him, and came to the borders of Japheth, which were toward the south opposite Arabia. He surrounded all the children of Midian, and set their tents on fire, and plundered their sheepfolds. He went down into the plain of Damascus in the days of wheat harvest, and set all their fields on fire, and utterly destroyed their flocks and herds, and plundered their cities, laid their plains waste, and struck all their young men with the edge of the sword. And the fear and the dread of him fell upon those who lived on the sea coast, upon those who were in Sidon and Tyre, who lived in Sur and Osina, and who lived in Jimnan. Those who lived in Azotus and Ascalon feared him exceedingly. Chapter 3. And they sent him messengers with words of peace, saying, Behold, we the servants of Nebuchadnezzar the great king lie before you. Use it as it is pleasing to your sight. Behold, our dwellings on all of our country, and all of our fields of wheat, and our flocks and herds, and all the sheepfolds of our tents lie before your face. Use them as it may please you. Behold, even our cities and those who dwell in them are your servants. Come and deal with them as it is good in your eyes. So the men come to Holofernes and declared him according to these words. He came down toward the sea coast, he and his army, and set garrisons in the high cities, and took out of them chosen men for allies. They received him, and they all in the country around them, with garlands and dances and timbrels. He cast down all their borders and cut down their sacred groves. It had been given to him to destroy all the gods of the land, that all the nations would worship Nebuchadnezzar only, and that all their tongues and their tribes would call upon him as God. Then he came towards Australia, near to Dotea, which is opposite the great ridge of Judea. He encamped between Geba and Scythopolis. He was there a whole month, that he might gather together all the baggage of his army. Chapter 4. The children of Israel that lived in Judea heard that all of Holofernes, the chief captain of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations, and how he had plundered all their temples and destroyed them utterly. They were exceedingly afraid before him, and they were troubled for Jerusalem and for the temple of the Lord their God, because they had newly come up from the captivity, and all the people of Judea were recently gathered together, and the vessels, the altar, and the house were all sanctified after being profaned. And they sent into every coast of Samaria, to Cone, to Beth-horon, Belmaim, Jericho, to Choba, to Asora, and to the valley of Salem. And they occupied beforehand all the tops of the high mountains, fortified the villages that were in them, stored supplies for the provision of war, for their fields were newly reaped. Excuse me. Joachim, the high priest, who was in those days at Jerusalem, wrote to those who lived in Bethulia and Betomesthane, which is opposite Estralion, towards the plain that is near Dosium, charging them to seize upon the ascent of the hill country, because by them was the entrance to Judea, and it was easy to stop them from approaching, since the approach was narrow, and space for 2 men at the most. And the children of Israel did as Joachim the high priest had commanded them, and did the senate of all the people of Israel which lived in Jerusalem. And every man of Israel cried to God with the great earnestness they humbled their souls. They, their wives, their children, their cattle, and every sojourner, hireling, and servant bought with their money, put sackcloth on their loins. Every man and woman of Israel, and the little children, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, fell before the temple and cast ashes upon their head, and they spread out their sackcloth before the Lord. They put sackcloth around the altar. They cried to the God of Israel earnestly with one consent, that he would not give their children as prey, their wives as plunder, the cities of their inheritance to destruction, and the sanctuary to being profaned and being made a reproach for the nations to rejoice at. The Lord heard their voice and looked at their affliction. The people continued fasting many days in all Judea and Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord Almighty. And Joachim the high priest and the priests that stood before the Lord and those who ministered to the Lord had their loins dressed in sackcloth and offered continual burnt offerings, the vows, the free gifts of the people. They had ashes on their hats. They cried to the Lord with all their power that he would look up all the houses of Israel for good. Chapter 5. Holofernes, the chief captain of the army of Asher, was told that the children of Israel had prepared for war, had shut up the passages of the hill country, had forfeited all the tops of the high hills, and had laid impediments in the plains. Then he was exceedingly angry, and he called all the princes of Moab, and the captains of Ammon, and all the governors of the seacoast, and said to them, "Tell me now, you sons of Canaan, who are these people who dwell in the hill country? What are the cities that they inhabit? How large is their army? Where is their power and their strength? What king is set over them to be the leader of their army? Why have they turned their backs, and they should not come and meet me more than all that dwell in the west?" Then Achir, Achior, I'm going to say Achir, the leader of all the children of Ammon, said to him, "Let my lord now hear a word from the mouth of your servant, and I will tell you the truth concerning these people who dwell in this hill country near to the place where you dwell. No lie will come out of the mouth of your servant. These people are descended from the Chaldeans. They sojourned before this in Mesopotamia because they didn't want to follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldeans. They departed from the way of their parents and worshiped the God of heaven, the God whom they know. Their parents cast them out from the face of their gods, and they fled into Mesopotamia and sojourned there many days. Then their God commanded them to depart from the place where they sojourned and go live in the land of Canaan. They lived there and prospered with gold and silver and with exceedingly much cattle. Then they went down into Egypt, for famine covered all the land of Canaan. They sojourned there until they had grown up. They became a great multitude there, so that one could not count the population of their nation. I burped. Then the king of Egypt rose up against them and dealt subtly with them and brought them low, making them labor in brick and made them slaves. They cried out to their God, and he struck all the land of Egypt with incurable plagues, so the Egyptians cast them out of their sight. God dried up the Red Sea before them and brought them into the way of Sinai, Kadesh Barnea, and they all cast out all that lived in the wilderness. They lived in the land of the Amorites, and they destroyed by their strength everyone in Heshbon. Passing over Jordan, they possessed all the hill country. They cast out before them the Canaanite, the Perizzite, and the Jebusite, the Shechemite, and the Girgashites, and they lived in the country many days. And while they didn't sin before their God, they prospered because God, who hates iniquity, was with them. But when they departed from the way which he appointed them, they were destroyed in many severe battles, and were led captives into a land that was not theirs. The temple of their God was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by their adversaries. And now they have returned to their God, and have come up from the dispersion where they were dispersed, and have possessed Jerusalem, where is their sanctuary, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. And now, my lord and master, if there is any error in this people, and they sin against their God, we will consider what this we will consider what this thing is in which they stumble, and we will go up and overcome them. But if there is no lawlessness in their nation, let my lord now pass by, lest their lord defend them, and their God be for them, and we will be a reproach before all the earth. It came to pass when Achir had finished speaking these words, all the people standing around the tent murmured. The great men of the Holofernes and that lived by the seaside and in Moab said that he should kill him, my bad. For they said, we will not be afraid of the children of Israel, because, behold, they are a people that has no power nor might to make the battle strong. Therefore now we will go up, and they will be a prey to be devoured by all your army, Lord Holofernes. Chapter 6. And when the disturbance of the men that were around the council had ceased, Holofernes, the chief captain of the army of Asher, said to Achir and to the children of Moab, before all the people of the foreigners, and who are you, Achir, the hirelings of Ephraim, that you have prophesied among us today, and have said that we should not make war with the race of Israel, because their God will not defend them? And who is God but Nebuchadnezzar? He will send out his might and destroy him from the face of the earth, and their gods will not deliver them. But we, his servants, will strike them as one man. They will not sustain the might of our horses, for with them we will burn them up. Their mountains will be drunken with their blood. Their plains will be filled with their dead bodies. Their footsteps will not stand before us, and they will surely perish, says King Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of all the earth. For he said, the words that I have spoken will not be in vain. But you, Achir, hireling of Ammon, who have spoken these words in the day of your iniquity, will see my face no more from this day, until I am avenged of the race of those who came out of Egypt. And then the sword of my army, and the multitude of those who serve me, will pass through your sides, and you will fall among the slain when I return. Then my servants will bring you back into the hill country, and will set you in one parish of the and will set you in one of the cities of the ascents. You will not perish until you are destroyed with them. And if you hope in your heart that they will not be taken, don't let your countenance fall. I have spoken it, and none of my words will fall into the ground. Then Holofernes commanded his servants who waited in his tent to take Achir, to bring him back to Beluthia, and deliver him into the hands of the children of Israel. So his servants took him and brought him out of the camp into the plains, and they moved from the midst of the plains into the hill country, and came to the springs that were under Beluthia. When the men of the city saw them on top of the hill, they took up their weapons and went into the city against him to the top of the hill. Every man that used a sling kept them from coming up and cast stones against them. They took cover under the hill, bound Achir, cast him down, left him at the foot of the hill, and went away to their lord. But the children of Israel descended from their city, and came to him, untied him, and led him into Beluthia, and presented him to the rulers of the city, which were in those days Ozias the son of Micah of the tribe Simeon, and Chabris the son of Gothoniel, and Charmas the son of Melchiel. Then they called together all the elders of the city, and all their young men ran together with their women to the assembly. They set Achir in the midst of all their people. Then Ozias asked him what happened. He answered and declared to them the words of the council of Holofernes, and all the words that he had spoken in the midst of the princes of the children of Asher, and all the great words that Holofernes had spoken against the house of Israel. Then the people fell down and worshipped God and cried, saying, O Lord God of heaven, behold their arrogance, and pity the low estate of our race. Look upon the face of those who are sanctified to you this day. They comforted Achir and praised him exceedingly. Then Ozias took him out of the assembly into his house and made a feast for the elders. They called on the God of Israel for help all that night. Chapter 7. The next day Holofernes commanded all his army and all the people who had come to be his allies, that they should move their camp toward Beluthia, take beforehand the ascents of the hill country, and make war against the children of Israel. Every mighty man of them moved that day. The army of their men of war was 170,000 footmen, plus 12,000 horsemen, besides the baggage, and the men that were on foot among them, an exceedingly great multitude. They encamped in the valley near Beluthia, by the fountain. They spread themselves in breadth over Dosam, even to Belmain, in the length from Beluthia to Siamam, which is near Esdraelon. But the children of Israel, when they saw the multitude of them, were troubled exceedingly, and every one said to his neighbor, Now these men will lick up the face of the earth. Neither the high mountains, nor the valleys, nor the hills will be able to bear their weight. Every man took up his weapons of war, and when they had kindled fires upon their towers, they remained and watched all that night. But on the second day Holofernes led out all of his cavalry in the sight of the children of Israel that were in Beluthia, viewed the ascents of their city, and searched out the springs of the waters, seized upon them, and set garrisons of men of war over them. Then he departed back to his people. All of the rulers of the children of Esau, all of the leaders of the people of Moab, all the captains of the sea coast came to him and said, Let our Lord now hear a word, that there may not be losses in your army. For this people of the children of Israel do not trust their spears, but in the height of the mountains wherein they dwell, for it is easy to come up on the tops of their mountains. And now, my Lord, don't fight against them as men fight who join battle, and there will not much as one man of your people perish. Remain in your camp, and every man of your army safe. Let your servants get possession of the water spring, which flows from the foot of the mountain, because all the inhabitants of Beluthia get their water from there. Then thirst will kill them, and they will give up their city. Then we and our people will go up to the tops of the mountains that are near, and will encamp upon them, to watch that not one man gets out of the city. They will be consumed with famine, and their wives and their children. Before the sword comes against them, they will be laid low in the straits where they dwell, and you will pay them back with evil, because they rebelled and didn't meet your face in peace. Their words were pleasing in the sight of Holofernes, and in the sights of all his servants, and he ordered them to do so as they had spoken. And the army of the children of Ammon moved, and with them 5,000 of the children of Asher, and they encamped in the valley. They seized the waters of the springs. They seized the waters and the springs of the waters of the children of Israel. The children of Esau went up to the children of Ammon, and encamped in the hill country near Dosam. They sent some of them towards the south, and toward the east, near Ekrabal, which is near Chusi, and upon the brook Mochmer. The rest of the army of the Assyrians encamped in the plain and covered all the face of the land. Their tents and baggage were pitched upon in a great crowd. They were an exceedingly great multitude. The children of Israel cried to the Lord their God, for their spirit fainted, for all of their enemies had surrounded them. There was no way to escape out from among them. All of the army of Asher remained around them, their footmen and their chariots and their horsemen 34 days, and their vessels of water ran dry for all the inhabitants of Beluthia. Their cisterns were emptied, and they had no water to drink their fill for one day, for they rationed drink by measure. Their young children were discouraged. The women and the young men fainted for thirst. They fell down in the streets of the city and in the passages of the gates. There was no longer any strength in them. All the people, including the young men, the women, and the children, were gathered together against Ozias and against the rulers of the city. They cried with a loud voice and said before the elders, God be judge between all of you and us, because you have done us great wrong, in that you have not spoken words of peace with the children of Asher. Now we have no helper, but God has sold us into their hands, and we should be laid low before them with the thirst and great destruction. And now summon them and deliver up the whole city as prey to the people of Holofernes and to all of his army. For it is better for us to be made a plunder to them. For we will be servants, and our souls will live, and we will not see the death of our babies before our eyes, and our wives and our children fainting in death. We take to witness against you the heaven and the earth, and our God and the Lord of our fathers, who punishes us according to our sins and the sins of our fathers. Do what we have said today. And there was a great weeping of all with one consent in the midst of the assembly, and they cried out to the Lord God in a loud voice. And Uzziah said to them, Brethren, be of good courage. Let us endure 5 more days, during which the Lord our God will turn his mercy towards us, for he will not forsake us utterly. But if these days pass and no help come to us, I will do what you say. Then he dispersed the people, every man into his own camp, and they went away to the walls and towers of their city. He sent the women and children into their houses, and they were brought very low into the city. That's the end of chapter 7. Wow, that would be very trying times. Could you imagine watching small children and everybody fainting with no hydration at all, and being surrounded like that? Good gravy. So, thank you everybody for stopping by my channel, and I love you, and so does Jesus. God bless everybody.